Hi, this is Joel Bohy. Thanks for watching this presentation. Originally, I put this presentation together as just arms, and a few of you were watching. I was giving it at the Concord Museum back in October, and YouTube got pissed off and shut it down because we were talking about guns. But hopefully this is an opportunity to get out some of the stuff on arms, but also some archaeology, documents in bullet strike study from April 19th, 1775. So my presentation is called Guns, Ball, and Ball Strikes, Understanding the Firearms of April 19th, 1775. So in order to understand the gun, we need to talk about the pieces and parts that make it function. One of the three important, the key three: lock, stock, and barrel. But we also want to talk about some of the smaller parts of the gun. And this great plan in the Norfolk discipline, militia manual, put out in 1759 and used by British and provincial forces, has a great little reference here. And we can look at the parts of the gun: the cock, O, the hammer, what we would call today the frizzen, and above that the feather spring, which we would call the frizzen spring. And here we have an original lock from 43rd Regiment of Foot, pattern 56, Longland. We've got the cock, the flint, obviously important to make the gun function when it strikes the hammer, and sends a spark into the pan where the vent or touch hole is, which allows the spark to get in and fire the weapon. So in this shot, I'm firing a double ball load in a pattern 1756. And if you look, you'll be able to see the flint hitting the hammer, sending the spark into the pan, and then the pan begins to ignite. You can see this in very slow motion. This is just the powder in the pan. As we get a little further in, you're going to see the gun discharge. And with a double ball load, it had quite the kick to it. We did this 3 times as part of a study, ballistics study, on whether the British were using 2 balls in their guns during the Boston Massacre. But anyway, right about now, you're going to see the charge go off, and it shoots quite a flame out through the vent. So in this shot, you can see the other end of the muzzle, and this is from that very same flint video that we just watched, with the 2 balls coming out. You can see I have written in the text, average muzzle velocity of a single ball is about 822 feet per second. What happens with a double ball load is the top ball comes out at about 300 feet per second, very slow, and the second ball at about 670. So we're able to test and realize that that double ball load really drops the velocity down, still enough to hurt somebody, but not about to kill somebody like you would with the 820 or so feet per second. So we're going to talk a little bit about British arms first, and we've got a couple to go through. First, I'd like to thank Don Triani for allowing me to use some of his images, including this one of a British grenadier as he would have been dressed on April 19th, 1775, from the 52nd Regiment of Foot. And actually, I modeled for that painting about 25 pounds ago, and probably about 10 years. Couldn't fit into that stuff anymore. But he's equipped, like I said, with a pattern 56. So here we have a 43rd Regiment of Foot, pattern 56, Longland, captured on April 19th with a pretty good provenance, and it's in the collection of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It was hanging in the State House for many years after being donated by Theodore Parker, grandson of Lexington Captain John Parker. And after it was donated in 1860, it was hanging in the State House for quite some time. It came down for some work to be done, so we went in to research it. Pretty cool gun. You can see lightly on the barrel. It's marked 43rd Regiment, and there are some rack numbers on the escutcheon plate, along with some brass plates on either side of the butt. So these brass butt plates were put on by the grandson of Captain John Parker, Theodore Parker. And on one side, it talks about this gun being the first firearm captured in the War for Independence on the morning of April 19th. And on the other side, it says taken by John Parker on April 19th, commander of the rebels at Lexington. I couldn't understand how he would have captured it, but, Who knows? And then I found a document that made the picture a little bit clearer. So who really captured the gun? There was a member of Captain Parker's company named Joshua Simmons. He had gone into the meeting house to load his powder horn right where the British were coming up the road and right around the corner, and he wasn't able to get out and be in the fight that morning. However, he came out afterwards and he found a grenadier, and it says on the first part of this, which isn't on the screen, he made no attempt to escape, and I took him into my custody. He was an Irishman, fully 6 feet in height, and manifested but little interest in the morning excursion. To my inquiry as to his delay, I found he had been overcome with liquor, lingered behind, and lost his companions. I took him to a place of safekeeping away from the possible line of march of the army when they should return. He was thus the first prisoner captured on that day. So looks like Parker didn't capture the gun, but Joshua Simmons did. So in doing some research today to put this together, I thought about that gun, the 43rd gun, for a minute, and I realized I had a document from the Massachusetts Archives, which was from 10 prisoners in Concord in the jail at the time, complaining about their conditions. And as I looked at the list, I found 2 members of the 43rd. We have a Samuel Colton, and we have Duncan MacDonald right here. So a search of the records proves that Samuel Colton was actually in the Light Infantry Company. He wasn't a grenadier, but Duncan MacDonald was, and he was the only grenadier captured that day. There were no grenadiers killed. It was just he that was captured. So I think we have a pretty good idea who carried that gun. So after April 19th, the British put loss reports together on all the arms and equipment that had been lost on the expedition to Concord. And here you can see the 43rd Regiment on this list. They lost 11 guns and 1 broken. This one prior, probably one of these guns, one of the 11 that were captured on the 19th. Another British arm that was captured on the 19th is this Fusil. It's a slightly larger than what we would normally think of as a Fusil. It's commercially made by Grice in the collection of the Concord Museum. This particular gun, along with a Cateau, officer's Cateau, were captured on the 19th by a Watertown militiaman named David Bemis. He captured an officer, supposedly. We don't know who he was, but he took the gun and the sword with him, and they ended up being donated into the Concord Museum. And his muster rolls, we couldn't find him as we searched. And one day I was in Massachusetts Archives. We went in to look at some documents, and I went through all of the April 19th returns for those who marched on the alarm. And when I got to Watertown, I found out why we couldn't find David Bemis, because his last name, they had added an A, so we have David Bemis Jr. right here. So we do know that he marched. Another gun captured from the British on April 19th by a William Barker from Sudbury. William Barker, it looks like, was at Ebenezer Bradish's Tavern in the village of Menotomy in the town of Cambridge on April 20th, and it looks like somebody went in and stole the gun he had already stolen. So who knows where it ended up, but we do have a rack number, a bizarre rack number on it now, that hopefully if the gun turns up, we'll be able to know where it came from. So since we're talking about a bunch of different things, not just the guns, but some of the damage that the guns do, we can't talk about arms all afternoon. I wish we could. But we're going to talk about some provincial guns now, a few that survive. This picture, our painting from Don Troiani, shows a militia or minute officer carrying some kind of a commercially available Fusil and bayonet, which we have records for. So I get asked this question a lot. What types of guns did the provincials use? The question is, it's an extremely broad one. They were using all sorts of arms. Here we have this newspaper clipping on Nathan Putnam from Danvers, Massachusetts. Nathan was badly wounded in the village of Menotomy, where that other gun previously was taken from. And it looks like he had a gun given to him by the selectmen of the town of Danvers, and he lost it after he was wounded. The other thing with Nathan Putnam is he was pretty badly wounded in the right arm near the shoulder by a musket ball which broke the bone and disabled him, according to the pension records. So it screwed him up pretty bad. Below that, we have a quote from Lieutenant Frederick Mackenzie, who said these fellows were generally good marksmen, and many of them used long guns made for duck shooting. So there's a lot of fowling pieces that have a provenance. There's also a few listings of Spanish arms, probably some old King's arms or commercial King's arms like Wilson's. Parts guns, they were building guns out of just about anything. And this gun, Corporal Roger Brown's Fowler, is one of my favorites. It's one in the Concord Museum collection that for years I kind of didn't even look at because it had been half-stocked and badly reconverted to flint. But as I picked it up and looked at it, I realized how much of an idiot I was, because on it was a silver plate from Roger Brown giving it to his son, William Brown, in 1829. And then it passed in 1881 to Roger Brown Moore, another descendant of Brown's. The gun itself is dated 1756 on the flat of the octagonal breech. Got a great French butt on it, like a lot of Fowlers do from Massachusetts, New England area. Small bore, about a 62 caliber. And the great thing about this is the descendant who donated it was actually in the Moore line, who had ended up in Canada in the British Army. And when he donated it to the Concord Museum, he wrote a note that says, "I really have to smile at the circumstance of a British officer sending trophies that saw one of Britain's defeats. I'll bet old Roger is spinning in his grave." Roger Brown's powder horn, I found it in the collection of Minuteman National Park, and we've been able to get that together for an exhibit there. But it's a great piece for the great history, and Roger Brown's house still survives in Concord to this day. Another great gun that was donated to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Captain John Parker's Fowler. Theodore Parker, John Parker's grandson, had donated it at the same time as he had donated the Pattern 56 Longland we looked at previously. It's a fantastic gun. It has been shortened. It was reconverted to flint at some point, put into percussion, and then badly done back again like many of the others. Reinforced cock, but it's got a great French-style butt on it. On the left side of the butt is a plate that his grandson had mounted on it, that it was Captain John Parker's gun used that morning. One of the great things about it is, after doing archaeology work out in a place called Parker's Revenge, which I talked about at a ASAC conference a while ago, we were digging up musket ball that very well could have been fired by this gun. Another great fowling piece in the collection of the Museum of the American Revolution is Captain David Brown's Fowler. David Brown commanded one of Concord's 2-minute companies and was in second in line that day at the bridge behind Captain Isaac Davis from Acton. His house was literally right next to the North Bridge. He had maintained it for the town for years, and he was literally fighting in his front yard. So here's David Brown's Fowler. It's simple lines. It's been converted to percussion. The great thing about this gun is it does have a provenance directly from David Brown to the ancestor who donated the gun. But it's been converted for martial use. Locally made really crappy iron ramrod, some Dutch parts, a mixture, a blend of pieces and parts like many of the guns around here. And when the stock was cut back, there was a lug added under the barrel for a bayonet. So how else can we learn what types of guns were carried during this time period? Going through archives can be extremely helpful. I've spent a lot of time going through Mass Archives records the past 2 years, and this one's great. It's dated June of 1775, a little bit afterwards, but it lists the number of bullets to a pound each gun carries in Captain Turner's company. And if you look at it, the 14 to 16 range is going to be, about a 64 caliber. The majority of the ball is in the lower range, so that's telling me that there's a lot of fowling pieces in this company. Just a cool thing to be able to see, to help us understand these guns. Archaeology is another great way to learn about the weaponry that are being used. This particular shot was from the Parker's Revenge project, which I mentioned before, the spot where Captain John Parker and his company got back into the fight after being decimated on Lexington Green that morning. We were able to find out they deployed in a line, and they waited for the British light infantry to cross the road and fired on them. And here, what I have in my hand, it was one of the last ball we found after 3 weeks in the field, and it's a fired British 69 caliber ball. It was found kind of behind a rock. Kind of made my day too. So ball patterning by bore size helped us to understand the project a little bit better. In this map here, you can see all of the ball marked in red were 69 caliber ball, so they were fired British. at the provincials that were escaping to fight down the road a little further. And if you look in front of that, you can see a line of blue and white dots. Those are all the ball that were either Fowler or slightly larger, still could be fowling pieces, that were fired by Captain Parker's company. And in the middle of the whole thing, there's the red dots. There's a small blue dot with a yellow circle around it. That's a dropped Fowler ball. I believe it was a 62 caliber. But it helps us to understand where the guys were, but it also helps us to understand the weaponry that was being used that day. One of my very favorite finds was found by a guy named Benjamin Lincoln Smith in 1934. He was an avocational archaeologist living in Concord, Mass., and he went up to a field above the North Bridge, and he had seen it plowed for the first time in his life. So he went up the next day, and it snowed, and he started to find flints. He'd been looking for Native American material, but he ended up finding musket flints, and in his notes he said they stood out against the dark wet ground like glittering jewels. So he started to find them. Within a few days, he had found almost 100 in 2 rows. And by that find, we were able to tell a few things. A, that the minute and the militia companies, before they marched down to the North Bridge, were ordered to change their flints to make sure the guns go off. The other thing we found out is the variety of different sizes of flints tell us about the guns that are being used. They're all English gun spalls. They're all English flints, so they would have been here before. So it's not like we were finding later French flints or English blades that were later than the Revolution. But like I said, they were found in 2 rows, about 50 feet apart, and we know that the companies formed up by minute companies and militia companies before they went to the fight. Experimental archaeology, live firing through ballistics testing, can really help us understand the gun's function. It can also help us understand the deformation characteristics of fired ball. When we're working on our archaeology sites, doing these tests helps us understand what we're seeing a lot better. We've done 2 now, and we're working on a 3rd and a 4th. One I'll talk about in a couple of slides, but we were able to use different types of guns, capture the data, fire at ballistics gel, fire at cloth, and learn some really cool information that we wouldn't have known if we didn't do this testing. So one of the current projects that I've been working on is a bullet strike study. There are actually a few places left that contain bullet strikes from April 19th, 1775. Some of them have been, hidden away and shared, and some of them haven't been seen before. So through the past 1.5-year process, we've been trying to record all the data, figure out as much information about where the bullet strikes or the bullets came from, what caliber they were. This particular door panel came out of the Adams house in Menotomy, which is a little village in Cambridge, which was hit very hard on the retreat route on the afternoon of the 19th after Percy's relief force had come up from Boston to meet up with Colonel Smith and hope to safely get them back to Boston. The fighting got really ugly here. Houses were burned, looted, and shot up. The British were shooting at everything they could find. So this door panel, it was listed as having been fired by a British musket ball, but based on the bore caliber of about 62 or 63, it was more than likely a provincial shot, or it could have been from a British Fusil or carbine based upon the entrance and the exit hole. But you can see the distinct entrance on the photo on the right top, and you can see the blowout on the bottom right rear. One of the most important and poignant bullet-struck artifacts from April 1975 is James Hayward's powder horn. James Hayward was a militiaman from Acton, Mass. He didn't have to fall out that day due to a wound. He had cut his toes off with an axe. But the 25-year-old schoolteacher formed up anyway, and he marched off to fight. At the North Bridge, his company would have been behind all the minute and militia companies, so he probably didn't have a chance to get off a shot. But he fought all the way along the battle road, the British retreat, back to a place called Fisk Hill in Lexington. And there's a story that he met a British soldier. He was getting a drink at a well. He met a British soldier coming out of the Fisk house, looting the Fisk house. They fired at each other. The British soldier fell dead instantly, and Hayward fell mortally wounded. So looking at this powder horn and looking at it scientifically, it is shot by a 69 caliber ball. It's got a little variance. There's about a .70 on one side, but that's fine. You can see the entrance, and also you can see the exit. The ball went through the horn, blew the plug out, and sent the ball and the shards into his body. He lived for another 8 or 10 hours. Mrs. Fisk had been hiding in the basement. She came up, found the dead British soldier in the yard, and then found Hayward there. It is believed Hayward's father had a chance to get there from Acton to meet his son before he died. But in any event, the powder horn was passed down through the Hayward family until it was donated to the town, and right now I believe it's on display at the Museum of the American Revolution on a loan, but it's normally in the Acton Memorial Library where pretty much nobody goes to see it except me. But it's just a wonderful artifact, and we're going to, in the next ballistic study, we're going to be shooting at a couple of powder horns if we can hit them. The Elisha Jones house, or what we've been calling the bullet hole house since I was a kid, sits right outside of the North Bridge area. You've probably driven by it if you've gone to the park. It's on the right-hand side right before you get to the parking lot. The house originally had a detached shed, which would have been further to the left of this image. But at some point in the 19th century, it had been slid down and attached to the main house. So you can see the door just in the middle, about the middle right of the picture. Just to the left of that, British soldier retreating from the North Bridge fired a shot that went through the paneling. Here you can see the triangle where it's marked. It's a 69 caliber ball. We tested that. Then it hit a post on the inside of the house and shot through the back wall. So here we have the blowout on the wood paneling, sheathing, and then you can see where it hit the post, and it almost looks like chisel marks where it cut through and diverted to the other side of the shed. In the collection of the Lexington Historical Society is the original front door from Buckman Tavern right next to Lexington Green, where the fight happened earlier that morning. It's at about this point where Lord Percy with his relief forces showed up, just outside of town, about half a mile or 3/4 of a mile east from this building. But this is where some of the fighting started to get heavier. There were a couple of buildings hit in this area, and the front door was saved. And here you can see the door with a ballistics rod sticking out of it. So we were able to basically locate that door, and we located roughly where the shot came from. Again, it's a 69 caliber ball, so it's more than likely a British shot. And here is the exit. You can see the typical blowout that it does when it exits wood. We're going to be doing some live fire testing. We have house panels built and pieces of paneling, so we can shoot some of these things and test how the woods react. And we're using older woods. We're using wood from about the same time period. We figured by 1775 it wouldn't have dried anymore, and the quality of the wood we have now, that 18th century wood, is pretty good. So it should give us similar results. So the Munroe Tavern in Lexington briefly became Lord Percy's headquarters. He used it as a hospital for some of his men as he regrouped. He burned all of the structures around this building. And as the British approached, somebody fired a shot through one of the windows, and it hit the taproom ceiling. In future generations, instead of people destroying this or covering it over, they left it open, finished the rest of the ceiling, but left that spot open as an important reminder of the events. It's one of those things, it's really fun to travel this road and go in and see these things, because it really brings some of the history to life. So at the Munroe Tavern, the original building was owned by William Munroe, and he had passed away in the 1740s or 50s. So this portrait of him was hanging in the tavern that his son now ran. It was there on the 19th on the wall. We don't know which wall yet. We've been trying to figure out. We may never know. But at some point, a British soldier fired a shot, and Mr. Munroe was wounded in the arm. The ball went through. It gauges out to about .70. So again, another British musket ball. And at some point after the event, it was crudely restored. But I'm glad they didn't do too much to it, because you can literally see it's a musket ball. And the last stop for this presentation is the Jason Russell House in what is now Arlington, Massachusetts. At the time, it was the village of Menotomy, a town in Cambridge, or a village in Cambridge, Mass. And it was hit very hard on the 19th. There were 12 men in and around this house killed, provincial men. We're not sure about the British. There's a great account, an unpublished account, which a British officer from the 4th Regiment of Foot came into the yard. 2 men around him were killed. and he got into the house and he counted 11 men, and he also counted one of the dead provincials had about 73 musket balls in his ball pouch, so I guess he had time to count the ball as the fighting was going on. But British soldiers got into this house and they shot it up pretty bad, and it's amazing that as many ball strikes still survive as there are. We started a ball strike study here on January 13th, 2019, and we're hoping to finish it all up. We've done some ground penetrating radar, three-dimensional laser scanning of the inside and outside of the structure. With a three-dimensional scanning, we're hoping we can add in all the bullet strikes so you can see each one of them and where they came from. Many of them came through the windows. The British were firing at all the windows, any place they could be shot from. So that's where we started to really look for ball strikes. You can see the crew here. We have on the bottom left Dr. Doug Scott. Some of you guys may know him. Great forensic archaeologist, famous for his work at the Little Bighorn and many other places also. I've had the privilege to work with him at the Parker's Revenge Project, and many others, including the ballistics study we're working on. So we've been working together now on some fantastic and fun projects, and hopefully we both live long enough to be able to do some more. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Didn't want to make it too long and bore the crap out of you, but hopefully there's some interesting tidbits in here that might get you interested a little bit more. On a good note, it looks like member Stuart Mowbray is going to be publishing our bullet strike study, hopefully in about a year or so. We'd like to get it done and get it out. We've still got some work to do, but there's some fun things going on, some fun research projects going on. I hope everybody's doing okay. Stay safe, and I look forward to being able to go to another conference with you all again.